have been admitted into the pediatric unit, and 16 of them are now dead.
The lack of food and medicine got worse after the blockade. 206 children came into our hospital and 16 of them are dead. We are running out of medicine. Even the little we have cannot last for more than 2 or 4 weeks.
Dr. Mohammed alarmed his concern that thousands of children could die unless pragmatic actions taken to reverse the siege and blockage posed on the very existence of the entire people of Tigray.
We have many diabetic children. They need daily consumption of insulin to survive. We know their life will be at risk if they fail to provide them with the medicines they need. But we couldn't give this treatment to these children in need due to the lack of supplements because of the siege. If the siege continues, we will lose thousands of children.
According to Dr. Mohammed, the critical lack of medicine has posed serious professional temptations on the way they are treating their patients with the insufficient medicines that they have.
We are treating only the children who are in a severe condition because of the lack of medicine. This means that there are children suffering from same disease who need the same medicines and treatments. But we are tempted to prioritize the most affected ones. We are also treating patients with different kinds of chronic illnesses, including HIV, kidney problems, and coronary heart disease. We are running out of medicine to treat these patients. The patients need the treatment daily, and we couldn't satisfy the demand due to lack of medicines and the other necessary inputs which are totally impossible to access because of the siege. If the problems are not solved shortly, thousands of patients could die.
Dr. Mohammed Mustafa calls for the international community to take decisive action to end the siege and open up the humanitarian corridors to Tigray. He also urged the aid workers and wealthy individuals to do their best to save lives of the children suffering from lack of food and medicine.
Almost 5 months have passed since the central government imposed an all-encompassing siege, blocking all humanitarian corridors in Tigray, making it impossible for the life-saving humanitarian aid to reach those in desperate need. One of those, most indeed, are the 2.2 million IDPs sheltered in different towns and cities across Tigray, now in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. Fani Lemiro has more.
I am hungry. I need food.
This is the demand of every children across Tigray. We've been to one of the IDP centers located in Magala and met many children displaced from western and other parts of Tigray. These IDPs used to be aided by residents of Magala city, but now the residents themselves are in need of humanitarian aid to survive from the siege-induced famine. Yet these residents are still trying to help, but their help is inadequate to fulfill the needs of these severely famine-affected children.
We only eat once in a day. There is no breakfast or lunch. We only eat dinner. Back at home, I was well nourished. I used to eat 3 times a day, but now we only eat once. We couldn't get enough food.
We came across while Magala residents were sharing their food to their fellows in the desperate IDP camps. They said that they didn't expect this level of starvation could prevail in the camp, and that they were shocked when they saw the severely affected children. And they urged the international community to help the children facing the ugly faces of famine.
We came here at least to share from what we eat. But when we arrived, we witnessed that these children are in a very critical situation and our help is not enough to solve their problem. So I call for Magala residents in the world to save these helpless children.
Human Rights Watch most recent report on Tigray focuses on survivors of sexual violence, documenting the serious impact on women's health and the trauma and stigma that has followed. The report titled, "I Always Remember That Day," document the experience of sexual violence survivors from age 6 to 80. Human Rights Watch says the report includes acts committed since the start of the conflict in November 2020. According to the report, Ethiopian and Eritrean forces and the regional Amhara militia have committed rape, gang rape, sexual slavery, torture, often accompanied by killings of family members, beatings, and discarding of ethnic-based slurs. Reporter Aragawi has more on this.
After the federal government of Ethiopia and its allies waged a genocidal war against the people of Tigray last year in November 2020, unspeakable atrocities have been committed on the civilians by Eritrean and Ethiopian forces as well as Amhara militias. Those forces have deliberately destroyed healthcare centers and infrastructures, looted public and private properties, massacred civilians, and committed sexual violences against females from age 6 to 80. Nisha Vira, Women's Rights Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch, described the horrible case as follows.
Warring parties in the first 9 months of Tigray's conflict committed widespread sexual violence while deliberately targeting healthcare facilities, leaving survivors and their communities reeling. The government's effective siege of Tigray since June is doubly victimizing survivors by denying them critical medical and psychological mental health support.
According to Human Rights Watch, the rape survivors are in need of health service, including termination of forced pregnancies, treatment of HIV and hepatitis B, care for fractured bones, stab wounds, and traumatic fistula. In addition to this, the victims seek support for depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. A doctor who works at the hospital in Urban Center in Tigray had given his testimony to the Human Rights Watch investigation team about the inhuman deeds of the allied Ethiopian and Eritrean forces.
One day, Ethiopian military men came to the hospital with a teenage girl. We checked her and found that she was pregnant. She was one of the 6 lives in the Garib Guba military camp. With her consent, we terminated her pregnancy and gave her anti-hepatitis drugs. After that, quite a lot of women and girls were coming in seeking medication and to terminate their pregnancies, raped by conflict actors, mainly by Eritrean troops and Ethiopian forces.
The all-encompassing siege of the central government is worsening the suffering of the people of Tigray in general and the agony of the survivors of sexual violence in particular. Nisha Vira of the Human Rights Watch has more to say about this painful situation.
1 year since Tigray's devastating conflict began, survivors of sexual violence from gang rape to sexual slavery remain in desperate need of health care and support services. Not only have Tigray women and girls experienced horrific abuses, they are confronting shortage of food, medicine, and other desperately needed supports to rebuild their lives.
The Ethiopian government has besieged the people of Tigray, denying them access to food, medicine, cash, fuel, and all other necessities in violation of international humanitarian law. As a result, the provision of a health service has stymied. Human Rights Watch has called the African Union, the United Nations, the international donors to press the Ethiopian government and all parties to the Tigray conflict to halt abuses, allow rapid and unimpeded access to aid throughout northern Ethiopia, and support international investigation into the alleged abuses.
Patients with acute and chronic illnesses at Tigray Hospital suffering as the hospital is unable to provide basic medical services. The hospital has run out of stock for most basic medicines as a siege on Tigray that has blocked the entry of medical supplies and food aid reaches its 5th month. Aura Garotinsei has more on this.
Tigray Hospital has been among the few functioning health facilities in Tigray, as more than 80% of health facilities have been destroyed by Eritrean and Ethiopian troops during the 1-year-long conflict. However, the hospital has come to a point where it is forced to halt providing basic medical service to patients as it runs out of medicines for most illnesses. Patients with acute and chronic illness are in desperate need of medicine, with no medication to be found within the hospital.
I came here to seek medication for my son. Doctors prescribed medicine for his illness, but we couldn't get the prescribed medicine here.
My child tested positive for waterborne diseases, bacteria and cholera, but I couldn't get the medicine in the hospital. We're in a dire situation due to shortage of medicine.
I am a patient with chronic illness, diabetic. I have been taking insulin at Tigray Hospital, but I couldn't get any now because the hospital has run out of insulin. On top of this, I have caught giardia, but there is no medicine for this either.
Patients who used to get medical service at Tigray Hospital are frustrated as their health conditions escalate from bad to worse amid the devastating shortage of medicine in the hospital.
We have no money as banks are entirely closed in Tigray. It has been a week since my child got sick, but I will go straight home now because I cannot buy from private pharmacies in case they have any, since I do not have the money.
The hospital's pharmacist, who was on duty, also says patients with chronic illness are suffering due to the worsening illnesses, as the hospital is unable to provide them with the medications needed.
We have diabetic patients in our hospital, but as you can see, they are returning home without getting the required service. Patients with hypertension could not get medicine because our hospital has been unable to get medicine since June 28, 2021, due to the siege. Our society is suffering a lot.
Alliance of Civil Society Organizations of Tigray, ACSOT, releases a statement condemning findings of the joint investigation by Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. The alliance opposed the joint investigation due to the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, a state-appointed body, and acclaimed investigator used flawed methodologies. Aragawi Gaurav Mikhail has more on this.
There are around 60 civil society organizations in Tigray that have repeatedly expressed their concerns to the national and international communities about the gross humanitarian violation in Tigray. Due to the devastating war, they also call for an impartial investigation of these discretions. Meanwhile, the Office of High Commission for Human Rights has released a joint investigation of the atrocities committed in Tigray in collaboration with the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. ACSOT was among the many that firmly opposed the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, as it is funded by Ethiopian government, the main actor of the atrocities committed in Tigray.
Thank you very much. The reason why we are here is we, the member of Alliance of Civil Society Organizations of Tigray. As we all know, recently the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, jointly with the Office of UN Higher Commissioner for Humanitarian, they have already submitted their report, and the report was mainly to investigate what had happened in Tigray in the last 1 year almost. So as civil society organizations in Tigray or members of ACSOT, we have been already discussed deeply. And we were also invited some professionals from different sector to see how the report is. And we already agreed that on the findings, as ACSOT have duly reviewed the report, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, as well as the UN Higher Commission of Human Rights, joint investigation is really biased. Because from the beginning, when the study or survey were started, we already present our appeal. The Ethiopian Human Rights Commission should not be involved because it is not impartial and it's not independent. So from the beginning, we have already presented that one, but that was not really accepted.
The statement of ACSOT also stated that the joint investigation has violated the principles of impartiality, neutrality, and transparency, as it excluded local civil society organizations either in consultation or participation. The Alliance expresses its complaint as follows.
Then following the review process, all members, we had organized a discussion forum and also have invited independent experts to get expert opinion on the joint investigation team. We have identified several issues on the grave concern that the joint investigation team has failed to take into account, which have a negative repercussion to the humanitarian and development response in the region. And because of that, as I have already mentioned before, from the beginning it was violated because the principles of independency, impartiality, and transparency is already lacked. In the course of investigation, local CSOs were neither consulted nor participated in the process. We represent older people as civil society, persons with disability, children, women, youth, and IDPs, but we were not really consulted or we were ignored.
The umbrella member of the civil society organization of Tigray objected the findings of the joint investigation. They have articulated key reasons as to their firm stand against these findings as follows.
As it stands, the finding of the report failed to reflect the reality of the ground for the following reasons. Reason number one, the joint investigating team has failed to observe the do harm principle. The report failed to recognize the magnitude of the atrocities committed by the Ethiopian National Defense Force, Eritrean Defense Force, Amhara Special Forces, Fano, and affiliated militia. The war has resulted in worst humanitarian catastrophe in the 21st century. The report undermines the suffering of the people by downsizing the humanitarian disaster. Access to humanitarian relief during wartime was essential to save lives in the time of emergency has been totally blocked, and the Ethiopian National Defense Force, but the report has ignored such kind of facts. The report did not consider the facts of the ground by whom the access for the humanitarian denied. The report ruled out the hunger was used as a weapon war, whereas the federal government of Ethiopia using hunger as a weapon by denying people have right to humanitarian relief. The investigation failed to address credible sources that show Ethiopian National Defense Force, Eritrean Defense Force, the Amhara Special Force, and allied militia used rape as a weapon. The investigation failed to reveal what had happened on the horrific acts of the sexual violence by security forces of the then interim government and Ethiopian National Defense Force that may amount of genocide, threatened survivors not to speak on the joint investigating team in violation of safe house ethical protocols. The report failed to take into account the very fact that persons with disability, mentally ill, were particularly targeted by the Ethiopian National Defense Force and Eritrean Defense Force as if they were spies of TPLF and deliberately attacked. The report has totally ignored for the very fact of local CSO in Tigray, distracted by those forces.
Most sectors have significantly deteriorated since the start of the war in Tigray in November 2020. One of the most affected has been Tigray's water supply system. Our reporters were in Negash, a town called Khaltawlalo district, one of the areas severely affected by waterborne disease, as its residents are forced to drink contaminated water due to the systemic attack on the town's water facilities. Abel has the details.
Negash, a town in the eastern zone of Tigray, is one of the historical places which the Al-Negashi Mosque is found. It is one of the towns that have experienced the devastating consequences of the year-long conflict. Thus, the town that has been showing high development of potable water coverage is now suffering from waterborne disease. Atzra Tesfai, Abret Berha and Gidana Berha are residents of Negash. They say that the Eritrean troops have vandalized almost all facilities for potable water supply.
There is nothing that they have not touched. Then after, all the pumps have become out of function. Now the people are facing the trouble. The problem is in every household. We will drink from the hand pumps, but those are not functioning too. We bring water from far. Those who have donkeys, they bring it with the donkeys. And those who haven't, they carry it themselves.
They have extreme cruelty. They have destructed all the pumps. They are very cruel. They hit us. They looted our property. They destructed our water pumps. A lot are displaced because of them. We're all drinking water from the river. This is because of them, especially the Eritrean soldiers.
We are drinking from the river. When we take our children to hospital, the doctors ask us what the children are drinking, and we told them that they are drinking a river water.
Haila Gebra, coordinator of the economic affairs of the district, also says that 178 water pumps were destroyed by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces and the potable water coverage has decreased by 23%.
Not only have they distracted water facilities, but they are also denying us access to food. Their aim is to kill us with starvation. Thus enemies had come to cleanse all Tigray.
Tigray's health system has been set back 20 years with over 80% of its health facilities, along with their equipments, completely destroyed. This systematic attack on Tigray's health system, along with 5 months-long siege, has put the lives of hundreds of thousands in danger. Abraha has the reports.
Dr. Hagos Godify, head of Tigray Regional Health Bureau, says a recent damage assessment uncovered massive destruction of health facilities across Tigray, excluding Western Tigray and some parts of Eastern Tigray, as the areas are still occupied by Amhara militia, vigilant Fano groups and Eritrean troops.
The damage assessment revealed around 78% health posts, 72% health centers, and more than 80% hospitals have become out of use.
According to Dr. Hagos, the destruction of the health facilities has led to low efficiency of service delivery in Tigray entirely, leading to massive deaths and untreated chronic illnesses.
According to the assessment in 2019, the vaccination rate in Tigray had reached 85%. Currently, it has dramatically declined to 17%. What does this indicate? This means it has descended back to what it was 20 years ago. That is why we are saying our health service system has slipped back 20 years.
Dr. Hagos also says the damages have made almost all of the medicine and medical equipment in health facilities across Tigray entirely obsolete, as they have been either looted or vandalized.
90% of medicine and medical equipment in Tigray have become out of use. A health facility without medicine and medical equipment cannot provide medical service.
To add insult to injury, the few health facilities that survived the damages are now unable to continue providing medical services as they have run out of medical supplies. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, director of World Health Organization, said in his recent briefing that people in Tigray are dying because they are unable to send supplies and medication into the area due to the blockade by the Ethiopian government. Dr. Tedros added that the blockade is systematic.
People are dying because of lack of supplies. We cannot send supplies and medicine, and the blockade is systematic.
Similarly, UN OCHA's recent report disclosed the fact that hundreds of patients with chronic illnesses at either hospital are exposed to severe health complications due to the lack of access to necessary medical services, with many dying. Referring to medical director of either hospital, OCHA reported that 47 kidney patients have died so far and 500 cancer patients are at high risk. They are unable to get the medical services that are solely provided by either hospital in all of Tigray due to the complete lack of medicine and medical equipment caused due to the siege imposed by the federal government. To sum up, the destruction of more than 80% of the health facilities in Tigray and the blockade of medical supplies have made it impossible to provide basic medical services in Tigray, dramatically deteriorating Tigray's health system to a level it was 2 decades ago.
And with that, we're going to wrap up this edition of Tigray Today. I'm Maren from Ma'ala Tigray. Thank you for tuning in.